Good morning. Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
Bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. Intertestamental Period of History. We are on lesson number... I forgot what lesson number we're even on. And I don't have it written down here. Slide here. Lesson number 16. So basically we're just in the beginnings of this lesson. And what we've been looking at here last few lessons are the Maccabean Revolt. Last week we talked about the death of Antiochus for Epiphanes, the change that was going to make in this historical context, in this time period. That was in 164 BC. We'll go back a little bit, go back and forth in this, picking up and looking at the Hasmonean kings, the Hasmonean rulers. But we talked about Judas Maccabeus, and he's the one who's called the Hammer. He continued the war against the Seleucids, hoping to free his nation politically as well as religiously. They gave them some religious freedom. They could pick their high priest. And of course, Judas Maccabeus kind of held that position, but he was killed 2 years later, and his younger brothers took over the fight. They finally secured the independence of Judea. What we're going to find out is that was very short-lived. So, as we look at this lesson today, starting Jonathan Maccabeus, and he dies about 143, 142, so he had a pretty long reign. Now, he's the high priest, but he's not a king. But he's ruling over Judea under the rule of the Seleucids at that time, and that would be Alexander Epiphanes. But according to what I've read, Jonathan Maccabeus was a brilliant diplomat. He refused all compromise with the superior Seleucid forces. So Alexander Epiphanes finally made peace with Jonathan, calling him his friend. In about 153 or 152 BC, Alexander selected Jonathan as the high priest in Jerusalem. Again, we remember this was a political position when the Seleucids were in power or had control over them. And typically, they had to buy the position to be able to rule over that area. But this was the beginning of the high priestly Hasmonean line. So Judas Maccabeus wasn't really a high priest, but he was a priest and had a lot of power. He drove Antiochus, Thor, Epiphanes, and his warriors out of Judea. So the compromise takes place, or the peace takes place. Jonathan's made high priest, and that's really the beginning of where they rule, though he's not a king. That'll come later. Alexander then dies and is succeeded by Trypho. What Trypho does is he lures, well, let me go back here. Because Jonathan is appointed then as high priest, The strict upholders of the law are alienated. Remember, you had two parties. You had the ones that accepted Hellenization, the Greeks' culture coming in to Judea, and then you had the ones who were very strict. They wanted the law of Moses kept, they wanted the old traditions kept, they wanted to be separate. So they didn't like it, these strict upholders of the law. The law held that no one should be high priest who was not a descendant of Moses' brother, Aaron. That's awful to forget about Aaron. Remember back in the book of Exodus, Moses and Aaron. And there are some scholars that will say, well, Moses was the religious leader, he was the prophet, and Aaron was the political leader. I don't see how they can claim that. Moses seems to be the political leader. He had some religious bent, but he delivered the law, and he appointed the judges, and he was himself a judge, and he led the people in the fights, even though Joshua was the one that he sent out to lead the military that they had as such. And Aaron was the one who was the religious leader as the high priest. But, so I don't know why people would say things like Moses was the religious leader and Aaron the political leader. Because it doesn't work out that way.
He was appointed as the spokesman for Moses. That's
right.
The story.
Right. Moses, and what the scripture says is Moses, I will be a God to you, Moses, and Moses, you'll be a God to Aaron. Now, of course, that's giving the instructions, passing it down through there. But the high priest, the priesthood came through the descendants of Aaron, and a high priest had to be from Aaron's lineage. And of course that gets confused all the way down through, and there was a group called the Zadokites who at one point kind of take control. And if you look at Zadokites, you can see how that would come out transliterated into like Sadducees. The very liberal ones who would accept Jonathan, a Maccabee. They were priests, but they weren't of the direct lineage of Aaron. And that's a little bit confusing. But you get going down through their history and looking at the priesthood, they understood. So what happens is the group formed an opposition party. That opposition party to the Zadokites, who become the Sadducees later on, they later on become the, guess what? Pharisees. And what we're talking about is 150 years before Christ. See how this political and religious interplay is going on even in these times?
I understand right, the Pharisees Okay, the Sadducees.
No, no. The Zadokites, who were we'll put it this way, the liberals who said it's all right, we can Hellenize and we can be like the people around us. You know, we'll accept the Greek culture and just be, you know, we can worship the Greek gods as well as Yahweh. No, they're the Zadokites who become the Sadducees, the opposition party who didn't like it that Jonathan was made high priest. They become the Pharisees. And this is going to end up in another civil war within Judea. That's where we're headed to. So their interpretations and applications of the law, written and oral, became accepted tradition in later Judaism. So they were for everything from Genesis to the book of Malachi. The Pharisees were. But the Sadducees, they only accepted the 5 books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Like the Samaritans, they took it and then they would have all this worship of Jupiter. I think we mentioned that at the one temple. Ecumenism. Anything goes. So that kind of gives us an understanding of what's happening at that time. So with Alexander being succeeded by Trypho, he immediately makes war against the Jews. Feigning friendship, Trypho lured Jonathan into a trap and killed him, and his brother Simon succeeded him as leader of the revolt. So you see, here's a man that's able to, for 10 years, probably, bring some peace to Judea from the outside, but what does it do? It creates a lot of civil strife inside in what he's doing. So this next leader, Simon Matthes, 135 to 134 BC. A born leader. Let me go back there. Didn't I say 132? 142. Okay. So you got a 7-year period there when things are kind of in a haze. Well, no. I guess he would reign for about 7 years, or be high priest for about 7 years. But Simon Matthes, a man of character, a man of prudence, a born leader. On his own initiative, Simon brought peace and security to Jerusalem. How did he do that? Well, he recognized Demetrius as the rightful king of Syria. So remember, you've got way over here in the east, you've got the Seleucids, and who's in control? It's Trypho, right? And here you've got Syria, a part of that, and they've got a king. Other places have kings, but they're under the control of Trypho. So he says, you know, Demetrius is the true king of Syria. And in making that decision, Demetrius becomes his supporter. Demetrius removes the taxes on Judea. And when he does that, well, Judea has some independence. You know, hey, that's good. Get the taxes off, right? Don't we have the same thing going on in our nation today? One says, hey, I'll take your taxes away. Oh, good. And the other one comes in and says, I'll take your taxes away, and then taxes you like crazy. And, oh, I'll take your taxes away. You know, it's just like taxes are a big thing. But when you have prosperity, lots of times you have peace. And if you have prosperity, you don't want to fight. You don't feel oppressed, right? What do you want to do? You just want to go about your daily life and make some money and have some food and have some clothing, maybe have a house. Well, that's what Simon's able to do. So what do the people, what do the Jews there in Judea do? They make him high priest for life. In other words, this isn't going to be a bought and paid for position anymore. Before, who's going to pay the big guy? Notice the phrase, the big guy? Who pays the big guy the most money gets to be the little big guy. No, the Jews make him priest for high life. High priest for life. Yeah, priest for high life. It works out the same way too. That's a pretty big statement. First Maccabees chapter 14 and verse 8 talks about that. So the Seleucid stranglehold on Judea is broken. Why is that? Alexander doesn't want to start fighting with, Trypho doesn't want to start fighting with Demetrius over Judea. Understand? It's not worth it, is it? To an Egyptian, to do what? make political ties, political inroads. And what happens? He and his two sons are assassinated by that son-in-law. Doesn't do the son-in-law any good, but didn't do Simon Matthes any good. Man of character and a man of prudence, a born leader, but what was his leadership? His leadership was in that line of the Zadokites, the liberal. Well, we're not following the law of Moses. We're doing what's expedient. We're going to be like the rest of the nations. We just do what we have to do to get along. That brings us to this. This looks different than what I've shown you before. Because at this point in time, I got to this part of the study and I said, I can't continue this study the way I've been going, because I had the introduction, I had this without part 1 and part 2 enumerated there. And when I come down to the Hasmonean Rulers, I thought, I've got another part I've got to put in here. So this is a work in progress. One day I'm going to have to go back and change a lot of stuff. I may change more when we get in, but the problem develops when we get into the Roman period. After the Hasmonean Rulers. I want one part for that. That's why this changes. So we've just looked at the Maccabean Revolt. That comes to about 141 BC, 142, 141 BC. And the idea there is that with the next rulers, the next high priest, and what happens there, he claims to be a king. And that changes everything. Makes the civil strife worse.
He was a priest.
He was a high priest. And he
declared
ruled
himself the king.
And he ruled. Well, let me take that back. Maybe not him, but eventually there's one that's going to say, I'm a king, and take power. But you notice this is from 134 to 63 BC, where you have these Hasmonean rulers. And the Maccabees turn into the Hasmoneans. But we separated, or I separated, because the Maccabees really take over the high priesthood. They revolt against the Seleucids, and they take the high priesthood, but then as they become kings, they take more of the title of the Hasmoneans, or are referred to as the Hasmoneans. Does that make sense? We're going to look at least one of those, or get down to the importance of this. Okay. John Hyrcanus, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was born about 175 BC. So he went through a lot of this stuff before he becomes high priest. And he's going to reign as high priest from 134 to 104 BC. He's the youngest son of Simon Maccabeus, or Simon Matthes. Go back. What happened? Simon and two of his sons are assassinated by Ptolemy. Who survives? John Hyrcanus. His father and two older brothers were assassinated by his brother-in-law Ptolemy. He refused to be called a king, but exercised the office of a king. That's important. He exercised the office of a king. So did the other ones to a degree, but now it's more so that he's taking political control over Judea. He began as a Pharisee, but converted to the Sadducees. Why would he do that? As a Pharisee, a lot of the people, hey, great, he wants to keep the law. He wants to honor God. But once he becomes this high priest, he knows he's not in the line for the high priesthood and all, and he sees the political implications. What does he do? He changes and becomes a Sadducee. It seems like they have a little more power politically and militarily. So his reign was marked by efforts to punish his enemies, defend against Syrian invasions, and expand Judea's territory. Syrian invasions, all right? Demetrius. Jonathan was Demetrius's friend. Well, or Simon, Demetrius, forget. But anyway, here's somebody that's a little different. So Syria's trying to get control back over this area. And so they're doing some invading. But he expands Judea's territory. He's got control of the military now, and he's going against these little pockets of resistance, not necessarily Jews, but the areas right around Judea. Hyrcanus thwarted Syrian incursions by forming an alliance with Rome. Remember, Rome is a republic, and Rome had defeated one person, one group of Seleucids, Antiochus's father, Antiochus IV Epiphanes' father. When Antiochus IV Epiphanes invaded Egypt, a Roman general stopped him. He went home. But here is a Jew who's making an alliance with Rome. Hey, help me out against Syria. You want Syria, you want to take Syria, you want a charge against Syria, come help me out. So he makes an alliance with the Romans. What he does then, he takes his little army, he goes to the north and conquers Samaria. He goes to the south and conquers Idumea. You remember when we talked about the destruction of Edom back at the time of when the exile took place, right after the exile? Edom was destroyed, not completely, but a lot of the Edomites went around to the west side of the Dead Sea and formed a little country there called Idumea. Well, that was in territory that had belonged to Judah. he went down and he took that area and conquered those people. He forced the Idumeans to convert to Judaism. Samaritans, to a large degree, had to submit to Judaism, Law of Moses, at least the first 5 books. Idumeans had to submit to Judaism. It was the first instance of forced conversion imposed by Jews in their history. So you're going from when they entered the Promised Land, which was about 1400 BC, and now you're down to 134. All that history, whenever they conquered a nation or whatever, they never forced anybody to become a Yahweh worshiper. They would accept people coming in and saying, hey, we want to be a part of you. Examples, probably Uriah the Hittite, definitely Ruth, she was a Moabitess, and she comes in. What did she tell Naomi? You know, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I want to live. I want to be like your people. They would accept people, but to force people to become Jews, this is the first time they do it. But that's a part of that liberal mindset. We can force you to do what you want to do because we're more powerful than you are. Well, this gave rise to Herod eventually being appointed king by the Roman emperor, because Herod was Idumean. Now, whether Herod the Great, we'll talk about his father, Antipater, not so much his grandfather, Antipas. Can't find much information on him. But Antipater either came from Idumea itself or had immigrated up to the area where Lebanon is today. And there were a group of Idumeans there that lived in that area that hadn't been touched yet, so to speak. So in one of those areas, that's where the roots of Herod the Great are coming from, the Idumeans, who are forced to become Jews. Under Hyrcanus, the Pharisees, a scholarly sect with popular backing, and the Sadducees, an aristocratic sect comprising the priesthood, became well-defined religious political parties. That's where they're congealed into Pharisee, Sadducee, and here's what we believe, and here's what they believe, and it's going to continue for a long time. So Hyrcanus' reign was the last under which Judea was a powerful united state.
You need to put Pharisees in there, number 3.
Yeah.
The Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Yeah, it's just in my, I've got it below, but I don't have it. I'll be back. Oh, yeah.
just put the word in there.
Yeah,
Under
I don't know that I can.
be something.
Yeah, I'll have to change it later. I can't do it. So, okay, it's 11:26, but that's going to get us to where we have this change that's going to take place. And I have Aristobulus Bulus 1. Next is going to come Aristobulus 2 and eventually Hyrcanus 2. And that's going to be a very important part of this. So, we got that done. We looked at, yeah. We'll begin with Aristobulus 1 next week, Lord willing.
There had to be a great deal of strife, ongoing strife, because you had a powerful religious presence running parallel to the powerful political presence throughout, especially this part of the historical part of it. And what comes to my mind is Thomas Jefferson or somebody studied all this, and that's where they separated church and state. Because this is continual strife. And,
Right.
and moving one side to the other continuously, it seems like. Well, not continuously, but as the power center shifted.
Well, this you're just talking about Judea. This had always been going on in all the other nations. This is Judea, the Jews wanting to be, or at least a large part of them, wanting to be like the nations around them, clear back to the time of Saul. And yeah, that provoked a problem. But yeah, Jefferson, Madison, a lot of the what we call the forefathers of our nation, they knew the Bible, but they also had a lot of help. A lot of the writers from England, especially, starting with the Magna Carta and coming up to men like John Stuart Mills and all. They were understanding that to have a king, one person over everything, led to tyranny. But the problems that we have anymore are not so much the tyranny of an individual as they are the tyranny of a party. And if you watch the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson,
Yeah.
okay, when they're in a church building and they're talking, or no, I don't think it's a church building. It might be a church building, but it's in South Carolina, and they're talking about the revolution and, you know, forming a state legislature and stuff, and they're talking, but he makes a statement, why should we exchange one tire that's a mile away? And sometimes you get in that position, and that's exactly what communism has been, where you look at China. How many people are members of the Communist Party in China? I think it's less than 1 million.
Really?
And maybe not so much members of the Communist Party, but the ruling element of the Communist Party. And they control over 1 billion people. And tell them everything, how their daily lives are going.
With no exceptions.
Well, yeah, there's an exception.
Yeah.
You can go to a camp, or you can have your brains blown out, or whatever, but... Okay. Thank you for your time and your